Thank you so much. And again, the first thing is to say a very big thanks to Emilia and everyone else at UCLG for being so strategic and brave and bold in crafting and nurturing this crucial space, this crucial community that is clearly inviting us to think and do things in a different way. So I just want to highlight three things to start and three things to end. So you will be happy to feel that you're closer to the end. To start with, the first three things, I suppose, have to do with, again, reminding us what is the conversation that we have been having about. And for me, there are three things that are important I take away. The first one is to remember that we are not talking about a pop-up crisis, we are not talking about a new unique crisis. We are talking about, for some of us, I'm sitting in London, you know, and perhaps here is a unique crisis, exceptional crisis, and so on. For most of the people that we are talking about on behalf of, this is a crisis within multiple everyday crises, and that will be faced now and beyond that. So we have to remind ourselves of that exceptional condition that we attribute to this crisis is a non-exceptional condition in which people living in informal settlements and working in the informal sector live all the time. So it's quite important to insist that, not a pop-up crisis, a crisis that we could see coming and we have to prevent in the future because we'll face similar ones, because it's absolutely rooted in pre-existing inequalities. The second condition that is also important, I think, to remind ourselves is that perhaps we talk less about that. What do we talk about when we talk about informality? We talk about informality today a bit like something that is out there. And I think that, again, it's very important to remind ourselves that what we call informality, informal settlements, informal workers, and so on, are absolutely essential for the functioning and the working of what we call the formal city. Without the informal sector, without the, you know, you don't have the reserve labor force, house, and so on, that does a lot of the managing, giving life, running cities on an everyday basis. So in a way, it's not about doing something good for others, but it's about us. The two systems work together. They are not separated, and we do need to think about that. Otherwise, we treat this as a subsector of the cities, as a subsector of economy, and that's perhaps where we tend sometimes to struggle. The third point I think that is very important is to go back to Emilia's invitation at the beginning. As important as it is to celebrate what we are doing well, it's also so important not to be self-complacent. Wherever we work, to keep on pushing and asking ourselves, why do we keep on talking sometimes about the same targets, the same objectives, and we don't get there? And I think that now, to move to the three final points, I think that there are three things that are important perhaps to remember in relation to what is that we could not only talk about differently, but also do differently. The first thing is clearly has to do with what Barbara mentioned before, as to really put in motion some form of redistribution. Change will not come unless there is a redistribution of the resources that are managed by the private sector, through communities, by local governments, and so on. And a very important aspect that was highlighted by many on the chat was, well, but actually, how much do we know about how many people are in this condition and that condition and so on? Well, we had two key reminders throughout the whole debate. One was, remember that one fourth of the global urban population live in the so-called slums or informal settlements, and 2 billion people work in the informal economy, not only in the global south, here in London, there in Barcelona, yeah, in the global north too. So we know about these big numbers, but when we go to a city, we zoom to a city, very often you ask a mayor, you ask officers and so on, and these numbers become very tenuous. However, those living and working in the informal economy have those numbers, produce data, and we have to engage with that data, and we have to recognize that that data is legitimate, is valid, is fundamental to plan with. So we cannot come and bring scientists and experts and so on to produce new data. We have to work with the data that is already being generated on a daily basis. This is something that we know about, the self-enumeration process, the self-mapping process, and so on. The second point has to do with recognition. So we talk a lot today, and it was fantastic to hear so many references to gender, to the very different conditions and experiences that women and men, girls and boys face. But we have to also remember about, it's not only about talking about those differences, it's about targeting social protection measures differently. What we need to do, my work for men in informal settlements and not for women, my work for migrants and not for, I don't know, for my work for all settlers and not for newcomers. A lot of what we talk about, and someone always falling through the net, are tenants. We are hearing a lot about rental holidays and so on, things that might work within the formal economy. But what do we say about those who are tenants? A very high percentage of people living in informal settlements are tenants. How are we going to help them? Usually Islam, not help them, how are we going to act upon the reality? Islam upgrading usually doesn't do anything for them. Yeah? Just does things that increase the rent. So we need to really be bold about those realities. The last point is about seeking parity of participation. We are talking a lot about needs, and of course it makes sense because we're talking about a crisis, but I love when someone, our colleague from Costa Rica, said we need to use also the long lights, yeah? The long distance lights, las luces largas. And I would say that we need to use both, the short and the long distance lights. And that means that one of the key things is that one of the key problems, or one of the key areas where we keep on failing, is on the fact that we talk about addressing needs, particularly in times of crisis. But we need to, again, address rights. We need to entitle rights. We need to activate rights, not talk about rights, not talk about human rights, about something that, you know, is to be, I don't know, dealt with in an abstract way. It's simply about activating rights, activating the entitlements for people, those that sometimes are treated as the others, to really become part of us. And I think that just to finalize, local and regional governments have a unique and an extraordinarily important role to play in all this. It's extraordinarily amazing, it's extraordinarily good to see that local authorities are here in this platform, not just considering themselves as someone that, you know, that's something to do with public, you know, street cleaning, solid waste management, and so on, but with these very essential issues of producing cities, of producing urban life, and now, as we know, of producing also health. Thank you so much.